Hey everybody, it's Emily. Welcome to another Grass River microclass. So today what I wanted to talk about is bird migration, and September is really the peak of when migrating birds are heading south. So it's a great time to talk about this, and obviously it's a huge topic. You know, we could talk about what routes birds take, how they navigate, how they get there, how they manage that, the energetics of it. So it's a huge topic. So today what I want to focus on is really just the costs of migrating and the benefits of migrating, sort of a pro and con analysis. So let's talk first about why migration would evolve in some bird species. What are the pros of it? What are the benefits? Because clearly there must be some. If, you know, over half of the around 650 bird species that we have in North America migrate, and, you know, almost 350 of those species are long distance migrators, meaning that they go from either Canada or the US down to Central or South America. So these are not, you know, short journeys mostly. So the first benefit, obviously, that I think we can all identify with is escaping the cold. But for birds, because they're, you know, endothermic, just like we are, warm-blooded, escaping the cold doesn't necessarily mean, you know, just getting out of the frigid weather. For them, it's all about energetics, and the economy of, like, the energy that they take in and put out. So if you're an endothermic bird and you have to spend frigid nights outside, you know, that takes up a lot of energy. And if you think about something like a black-capped chickadee, that's a very familiar backyard bird, they actually lose 10% of their body weight every night through burning fat, through shivering, mostly with their large flight muscles, their pectoral muscles, in order to stay warm. They also can do something cool called regulated hypothermia, where they actually drop their body temperature, so that saves energy too, but that's a whole nother topic. But yeah, so they spend a ton of energy, 10% of their body weight every night, shivering to stay warm. And so they are like on the edge of survival in the morning. And then they have to gain back that 10% of body weight in the day by foraging. So that's like the equivalent of like a 150-pound person spending the night outside, shivering all night, and then like losing 15 pounds by morning. So avoiding the cold is definitely a selective pressure for sure, a big one. The other thing is that depending on the type of bird, another pro of migrating is that you'll have plenty of food. So if you're something like a warbler, who is pretty much an insect specialist and only eats insects, there aren't really going to be that many insects active, at least, pretty much none, during the winter, right? So it's much harder to find food. So that kind of helps us it starts to explain why warblers are migratory. And things like chickadees aren't, because they're omnivorous. They do love to eat insects, but they can also switch to eating seeds in the wintertime. So avoiding the cold and having plenty of food kind of explains why northern birds head south. But then you start to think about, why wouldn't birds just stay south? What's the advantage of living up here anyway, like in the breeding season? There are a couple advantages. First of all, they're nest predation. So predators tend to be fewer up here in the higher latitudes, but also nest competition tends to be less because the density of wildlife is maybe not as high up here as it is in the tropics, depending on what ecological niche the bird fits. Let's see. Oh, also, up here in the north, in the summertime, we have higher concentrations of food. So there are food bursts, like insect bursts, which we all know if you ever experienced a mosquito hatch, or things like, pulses of periods where there are lots of seeds available or lots of fruit available, and that kind of thing is spread out more over the course of the year down in the lower latitudes in the tropics. But up here, birds are able to take advantage of that seasonal abundance of food if they make it back here for the summer. And then another thing is increased daylight. And most birds, obviously there are a few exceptions, but most birds are diurnal, meaning they're active during the day. And so by coming back up here, they're able to take advantage of those longer daylight hours in the summer so that they can be active longer and forage longer. So all those pros, those benefits, make it seem pretty attractive to migrate, right? But there are two really important cons that we need to talk about. So the first one is that just like staying up north is very energetically expensive for birds, especially small birds who have a smaller volume to surface area ratio, they lose heat really quickly. So just like it's really energetically expensive for them to stay up here, it's really energetically expensive for birds to migrate too, which makes sense. I mean, it's like, you know, a huge like marathon feat. So birds need to find enough food to fatten up before migration, and it's literally fattening up. They put on fat because fat per gram metabolizes to 2 times the energy output that either protein or carbohydrates does. So it's really fat they put on first before they migrate. And birds like birds that are non-migratory, like in the summer, like something like a chickadee or something, a small songbird in the summer that's non-migratory, will have maybe like 3 to 5% body fat. In the midwinter, as we talked about, you know, like that goes way up. Depending on what time of day it is, but you know, never more than like 15%. But then birds that like this equivalent bird, like a small songbird that was migrating, would have anywhere from like 30 to 47% body fat right before it sets off on migration, which is crazy. Like they're super hefty. If you think about something like a ruby-throated hummingbird, that normally weighs only 3 grams. Before migration, it has fattened itself up. A successful ruby-throated hummingbird will have fattened itself up to almost 6 grams, almost double its weight right before migration. And so that's the first con, is like fattening yourself up and finding enough food and to be able to do that. It's very energetically expensive. And the second con is that migration is super dangerous. It's like the most dangerous thing a bird will ever do. And you know, the dangers vary from inclement weather in areas that they're unfamiliar with, terrible headwinds when they're crossing open ocean, you know, like those ruby-throated hummingbirds, they have to cross 500 to 600 miles of the open Gulf of Mexico. So if they didn't calculate right and give themselves enough fuel, then like they're going to drop into the water. So bad weather patterns, but also, you know, it's just unfamiliar territory. So like unfamiliar predators might be lurking. Birds can get lost. And increasingly, human development has become a real danger to birds when they're migrating. Things like glass buildings and windmills can kill birds. So yeah, so migrating has definitely some selective pressures that are selecting for migration to evolve, and then on the other hand, you know, some selective pressures that are definitely selecting for it not to occur. So up to this point, we've been kind of talking about whether a species migrates or not as being very sort of like genetically programmed based on selection pressures. But what's really cool is that in some species, at least, there is a degree of flexibility individually. You know, it's not completely genetically programmed whether they migrate or not. So a great example of that is the dark-eyed junco. And we can see these birds year-round where we are. But what's interesting is that in the winter, we're probably only seeing young males, and this is why. So for young birds, as opposed to adult birds, migration, for every mile migrated, you know, the level of risk is higher just because they're inexperienced, they've never done this before, or they've only done it once. And so younger dark-eyed juncos tend to stay further north than adult dark-eyed juncos. So they're sort of like hedging their bets, you know, like I'll go far enough, but not any further than I need to. And then there's also a difference between males and females. So for males, their reproductive success, whether they successfully breed the next spring, is heavily tied to which males return first on the breeding grounds up north. So males also tend to stay further north than females, for who it doesn't really matter when they get there. You know, the males are just going to be there waiting for them. So it creates this really neat pattern in which young males are the dark-eyed juncos that tend to stay furthest north, so that's like upper Midwest and New England, and then the adult females, for who migration is not that risky, you know, relatively, and who don't need to be on the breeding grounds early, they migrate to the furthest south, so they spend the winter in like the Gulf states, and then adult males and young females are kind of in between, balancing those two. So, you know, that's a really cool example of a bird where migration isn't necessarily completely genetically programmed, but rather each individual bird is able to really choose their behavior and maximize their own individual reproductive success that way. So I feel like I can't really talk about this topic, bird migration, without addressing the recent deaths of hundreds of thousands of birds in the Southern Rockies, which likely the intense wildfires that are raging out west right now probably played a role in that, either through forcing birds to leave on migration before they had accumulated enough fat stores, or forcing birds to change routes, or birds inhaling smoke or something, you know. But likely there are a lot of factors, but I guess that just goes to show, you know, like, it's tragic, but how dangerous migration is for birds. So, to leave it on a happier note, if you want to do some birding around the area this time of year, which is a great time of year, migration, you know, lots of birds are on the move, so you see them. If you want to know like some great birding spots to go, or what species you might see at what times during the fall, I just wrote a guest blog for Traverse City Tourism about fall birding and fall migration. So check that out. Otherwise, I will see you guys next week. Have a great week. Bye.